I still hold that photograph in my hands. Me and my son, Michael. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old back then. We were sitting on the edge of the beach, the late afternoon sun turning the waves into liquid gold. His tiny fingers were digging through the wet sand, and his laughter, that carefree, bubbling sound, it filled the air like music. That day was probably the most beautiful day of my life. The kind of day that etches itself deep inside you, so even when the years wash over, you can still feel it. The warmth, the peace, the joy of that single moment. Back then, I had no idea what life had in store for us. No idea that the same little boy sitting beside me, with sand on his cheeks and dreams in his eyes, would one day grow into a man who would forget the woman who gave him everything she had. But that's the thing about motherhood. You don't think about the what-ifs. You just love and give and keep going. I raised Michael on my own. His father, Robert, passed away far too soon. A car accident, one rainy night. I still remember the phone call. I remember dropping the receiver and how the whole world suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I remember standing in our old farmhouse that day, staring at the rain hitting the windows, thinking, how am I going to do this all by myself? The grief felt like an ocean. But when I looked down at Michael with those wide hazel eyes, I made myself a promise. No matter what, this boy will never feel unloved. I worked 3 jobs to make it happen. In the mornings, I cleaned houses. In the afternoons, I worked at the diner off Main Street, the one with red booths and a neon open sign that buzzed louder than the customers. And at night, when Michael was asleep, I ironed clothes for the neighbors. I'd stay up till midnight sometimes, hands aching, back sore, but I never complained. Every dollar was a brick in the foundation of Michael's future. Michael was my reason to keep going. I used to sit beside his bed after a long day, brush the hair off his forehead, and whisper, "You're going to do big things, baby. Mama believes in you." And he'd smile in his sleep as if he heard me. When he started school, I saved up enough to buy him new shoes. Nothing fancy, just something that made him feel like he belonged. And when other kids bragged about vacations or big houses, Michael would say, "My mama works harder than anyone in this town." That line, those words, used to make my heart swell. Years passed. I kept scraping, saving, hoping. Michael got a scholarship to college. The day he left, I stood at the bus stop waving until the bus disappeared around the bend. My heart was proud, but my hands felt empty. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. He'd call me once a week at first, tell me about classes, new friends, city life. I'd listen, smiling, even when my dinner was getting cold. "Don't worry, Mama. When I graduate, I'll take care of you. You won't have to work another day." And I believed him, because mothers always believe their sons. Then came graduation day. I wore my best dress, blue with white buttons, and took a bus to the city. I sat in the back of the auditorium surrounded by proud families holding flowers and cameras. When they called Michael Davis, I clapped so hard, my palms stung. After the ceremony, he hugged me quickly, almost nervously, then introduced me to some of his college friends. Young, polished, loud. One of them laughed when I offered them cookies I'd baked for the trip. "Aw, your mom is adorable, man," someone said. And Michael chuckled along. That was the first time I felt the sting of distance. But I brushed it off. He was young, and life was opening up to him like a bright, busy street. After graduation, he got a job at a big tech company in New York. I was so proud I could barely sleep. I told everyone in town, "My boy made it! My Michael's working in the city!" I imagined him calling me from his fancy office, telling me about skyscrapers and bright lights. But weeks passed, then months. The calls slowed. When I called him, he was busy,
When I texted, replies came hours, sometimes days later. Then one day, I saw him on TV, a local news segment about young rising entrepreneurs. There he was, in a sharp gray suit, smiling beside a beautiful woman. The caption read, Michael Davis, CEO at a leading technology company. CEO. My little boy. I cried that night. Not out of sadness, but pride. I thought, he did it. He really did it. But the years that followed taught me something I wish I didn't have to learn. Sometimes when people climb too high, they forget who gave them the first step up.
As Michael's company grew, his calls became rare. Birthdays passed with short messages. Mother's Day turned into flower deliveries with typed cards that read, Love, Michael. No handwriting, no voice, just words on paper. One winter evening, I decided to visit him. I saved for months to afford the train ticket to New York. I even bought a new coat, warm, beige, with a little scarf that made me feel proper. When I reached his office building, I stood outside looking up at the glass tower touching the clouds. It was beautiful and cold, just like the life he was living now. The receptionist looked me up and down when I asked for Michael Davis. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" she said. I smiled nervously. "I'm his mother." She made a call. A few minutes later, Michael appeared, looking surprised. He was handsome, confident, but there was something in his eyes, hesitation. "Mama, what are you doing here?" I smiled. "I just wanted to see you, baby. It's been so long." He sighed quietly, glancing at his watch. "You should have called. I'm in the middle of meetings." His tone wasn't cruel, just detached, like a stranger speaking politely. Still, he took me to lunch at a nearby cafe, a modern place with glass walls and waiters who looked too serious for soup and sandwiches. We sat in silence for a moment. You look tired," I said softly. "Are you eating well?" He smiled thinly. "I'm fine, Mom. I've got a lot going on." He told me about investors, projects, profits, words that I didn't really understand, but I nodded anyway. I didn't come for details. I came for my son. When the bill came, I reached for my purse. He laughed a little too loudly. "Mom, please, I got it." Something about the way he said please, like he was embarrassed by the thought, stung deeper than I expected. After lunch, he walked me to the station. "Next time, let me know before you come, okay?" he said, giving me a brief hug. Next time, but next time never came. Months later, I found out he'd gotten married. Not from him, from Facebook. There he was, in a tuxedo, holding the hand of that same woman from the news segment. The caption said, "Congratulations to Michael and Emma Davis." I sat there, staring at the screen, my tea going cold. No invitation, no phone call, not even a message. That night, I packed away the quilt I'd been sewing as a wedding gift. Every stitch had been sewn with prayers and love. I folded it neatly and placed it in a box at the back of my closet. That was the moment something inside me broke quietly, not in anger, but in grief.
Time passes differently when you're lonely. Days stretch, seasons fade, and silence becomes a kind of companion. I kept myself busy in small ways, tending to my garden, baking pies for church fundraisers, sending postcards to Michael, even when I knew he wouldn't answer. I told myself he was just busy, that one day he'd come visit like he used to, maybe bring his wife, maybe even children. But that one day never came. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter from the hospital. Not for me, but for Michael. It had been mailed to my address, maybe an old record from before he moved. I decided to forward it to him personally. Maybe this was my excuse to see him again. I packed a small bag, baked a batch of his favorite lemon cookies, and took the first bus to the city. I imagined his surprise when he opened the door and saw me. Maybe he'd say, "Mama, you didn't have to come all this way." Maybe he'd hug me and introduce me to his wife. Maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged in his new life. When I reached their home, a beautiful brownstone with tall windows and ivy crawling up the side, I stood there for a minute, taking a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but my heart was full. I rang the bell. A young woman opened the door, elegant, polished, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my month's groceries. "Yes," she said, her voice polite but cold. "I'm here to see Michael. I'm his mother." Her expression froze for a second, a flicker of surprise, maybe even annoyance. "Oh, I see. He's not home right now. He's at a meeting." "Oh, well, I can wait," I said, stepping forward slightly. Her lips tightened. "Actually, we're expecting guests soon. It's really not a good time." I felt my stomach sink. "I baked cookies for him," I said softly, holding up the tin. "Lemon. His favorite." She hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You can leave them. I'll make sure he gets them." I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone told me I'd never see that tin again. Just then, a voice came from inside. A man's voice, Michael's. "Who is it, Emma?" And then he appeared, standing there in his tailored suit, phone in hand, looking every bit the successful man the world admired. When his eyes met mine, I saw it, that flash of discomfort. "Mama, what are you doing here?" I smiled, holding back tears. "I came to bring you something, honey, and this was delivered to my address, so I thought He cut me off gently. "You could have mailed it. You didn't have to come all this way." I swallowed hard. "I just wanted to see you. It's been so long." Before he could answer, Emma spoke up. "Michael, your investors will be here any minute. Maybe you can talk later?" Investors. Meetings. Always something more important. Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, I'm sorry. Today's just not a good time. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand." But as I turned to leave, I heard laughter. Another couple stepping in, expensive perfumes filling the hallway. One of them glanced at me and whispered something to Emma, who smiled tightly and said, "Oh, that's just Michael's mother." Just. That word hit like a blade. I left quietly, clutching the cookie tin against my chest. The city felt bigger, colder. I walked past cafes filled with chatter, people rushing past, and thought about how strange it is to raise someone with all your heart, only to become a footnote in their story. On the bus ride home, I kept replaying it all. Every mama that used to sound so warm now felt distant. I thought of the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street, who cried when I left for work, and who promised, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a big house, Mama." But success changes people. Sometimes not out of malice, but out of shame. Shame of remembering where they came from.
Months passed. The calls never came. My letters went unanswered. Then one morning, I received a notice in the mail. My property taxes had gone unpaid for over a year. Confused, I went to the county office. The clerk explained that my name was still tied to an old co-signed document from years ago when I helped Michael with his first business loan. His company had defaulted on a small portion, not enough to ruin him, but enough to affect me. When I called him about it, his assistant answered. "Mr. Davis isn't available. Can I take a message?" I said quietly, "Just tell him his mother called." She hesitated. "Of course, ma'am." But no one called back. For weeks, I struggled to fix the mess. I even took part-time work again, ironing clothes and baking pies to cover the overdue fees. My hands hurt, my back ached, but I kept going because that's what mothers do. Then one day, while I was at the grocery store, I saw him again. Not in person, on the cover of Forbes magazine. Michael Davis, the man who built an empire. His smile filled the page, confident, proud, wealthy. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I whispered to myself, "You built more than an empire, son. You built a wall." A few months later, I received an invitation in the mail. Gold-trimmed, elegant, formal. "The Davises cordially invite you to the grand opening of Vivid Tower, New York's newest landmark." My name was there. I don't know if it was an afterthought or a gesture of guilt, but it was there. I almost didn't go, but something inside me said I needed to, not for him, but for myself. When I arrived, the lobby sparkled with chandeliers and champagne glasses. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. Michael stood at the front, giving interviews. Emma was beside him, flawless as ever. When he saw me, he froze for half a second, then smiled politely, as if greeting a distant relative. "Mom, you made it!" He didn't hug me, just a handshake, quick and formal. "This is my mother, Eleanor. She's from back home." Back home. Like I was some relic from a forgotten town. The investor smiled. "Ah, so you're the reason he turned out so driven." I smiled faintly. "I just raised him to be kind." Michael cleared his throat, changed the subject. Emma guided the investor away. And I stood there, surrounded by lights and laughter, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. That night, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped him with homework, paid bills, celebrated birthdays. I looked at the old photo of him holding his first school trophy and whispered, "You were never meant to forget who you are." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. So tired.
Winter came early that year. The trees outside my window stood bare, and the air carried that cold, hollow stillness that only December can bring. I'd stopped expecting calls by then, stopped checking the mailbox twice a day. Hope, when stretched too thin, eventually fades into quiet acceptance. Then, one evening, while I was washing dishes, the phone rang. I answered the call. "Hello?" A voice hesitated on the other end. Male, familiar, but uncertain. "Mom?" It was Michael. My heart stopped for a second. "Michael? Is everything okay?" He exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. "No, Mom, it's not. Everything's falling apart." I set the dish towel down. "Tell me what happened." There was a pause. Then his voice cracked. "The company's gone. Investors pulled out. I trusted the wrong people, and they bled us dry. The house, the cars, even Emma. She left yesterday." I sank into the nearest chair. "Oh, sweetheart," he said softly. "I didn't know who else to call. I'm sorry. I know I haven't been a good son." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't angry anymore. It was broken, human, and real.
Finally, Michael, I said, my voice trembling, you don't need to apologize for being lost. We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is finding the road back. He was quiet. Then I heard him whisper, Can I come home? Tears filled my eyes. You never stopped having a home.
The next morning, I stood on the porch as an old taxi pulled up to the house. When Michael stepped out, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was longer, his face thinner, his eyes tired, but there was something else there now. Humility. He walked slowly toward me like a man unsure he deserved forgiveness. I opened my arms anyway. He didn't say a word, just buried his face in my shoulder and cried. We stood there for a long time, mother and son, no words needed. The years of distance melted in that single embrace. Inside, I made him tea, chamomile, his favorite when he was a boy. He looked around the house, his eyes landing on old photos, the worn furniture, the same curtains I'd sewn decades ago. Everything's the same, he said softly. Not everything, I smiled gently. You've grown, and so have I. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I thought success would make me free, Mom, but it just made me forget what mattered. I reached across the table, taking his hand. The world teaches you to chase money, but money can't hold your hand when you're afraid. It can't sit beside you when you're sick. It can't forgive you when you fall. He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw my boy again. Days turned into weeks. Michael had started helping me around the house. He fixed the broken light, painted the porch, and even began going to church with me. He spoke less now and listened more. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch swing, he said, Mom, I want to start my life over, but this time, not as a businessman, just as a human being. I smiled softly and said, Then start with kindness. It's the one thing that never runs out. He nodded slowly, as if those words rooted somewhere deep inside him. A few days later, he went to the city, not to reclaim his lost business, but to make right what had gone wrong. He sold his remaining assets, paid off his debts, and used what little was left to start a foundation. He called it the Eleanor Fund, a nonprofit that provided scholarships to single mothers raising children on their own. When he told me, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. It's named after you, Mom, he said quietly. I carried you when the world didn't. I just want to carry others the way you carried me. A year passed. The house felt warmer now, not because of the heat, but because laughter had finally returned to its walls. The echo of emptiness had been replaced with conversation, the sound of shared meals, and the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding their way back to one another. Sometimes Michael would cook dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and mashed potatoes, the kind he used to love as a boy. Other nights, he'd sit by the fire, telling me stories about the families his new foundation had helped. Single mothers, struggling students, veterans trying to rebuild their lives. There was a light in his eyes again, not the cold glint of ambition, but the warm glow of purpose. People began calling him the humble millionaire. Newspapers wrote about his inspiring comeback story. Talk shows invited him to speak about resilience, forgiveness, and second chances. But I knew the truth. His greatest success wasn't printed in headlines or measured in bank accounts. It was something deeper, something you can't buy or build. It was human. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky in gold and lavender, we sat together on the porch, the same porch where I had once stood alone, waiting for him to come home. The air was still. The crickets sang. Michael leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. You know, Mom, he said softly,
When I lost everything, I thought my life was over. I thought failure was the end. He paused, smiling faintly. But it wasn't. Losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. I turned to look at him, my son, older, wiser, finally at peace. Sometimes, I said gently, you have to lose the world to find your soul. He reached over, taking my hand, the same hand that had once guided him across the street, wiped his tears, and prayed for his return. His grip was steady, grateful. I'll never forget again, he said quietly. Not where I came from, not who I owe everything to. The last of the sunlight touched his face, and for a moment I saw him not as the man the world admired, but as the little boy who used to chase fireflies in the yard, barefoot and laughing. I smiled through tears. "Welcome home, Michael," I whispered, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it with my whole heart. Years passed. The seasons came and went like soft pages turning in a well-loved book. The house had grown quieter now, but it wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes when life has finally come full circle. My steps had slowed, my hair had turned silver, and I no longer moved around the way I used to. But I didn't need to, because every morning, just as the sunlight crept through the lace curtains, Michael would appear, carrying a tray with tea, oatmeal, and sometimes those same lemon cookies I used to bake for him when he was small. He'd set the tray beside me and say, with that same boyish grin, "Breakfast is served, ma'am." And I'd laugh, shaking my head. "You always were dramatic." After breakfast, he'd sit by the window, the one that overlooked the garden, and read aloud the letters that arrived for the Eleanor Fund, the charity he'd started in my name. The letters came from everywhere, from young mothers, struggling students, and women who'd been told they weren't enough. They wrote about finding hope, about rebuilding their lives, and about how one small act of kindness had reminded them that they mattered. That morning his voice was full of warmth as he read one out loud. "Dear Mr. Davis, because of the Eleanor Fund, I'm now studying nursing. I want to help people the way your mother helped you. Thank you for believing in women like me." When he finished, he looked up at me with shining eyes. "Mama," he said softly, "we just paid tuition for that young mother. She's going to make a difference, just like you did." I felt my heart swell. I closed my eyes and smiled. "That's the best legacy you could ever leave, Michael," I whispered. He leaned closer, his voice low and tender, and pressed a kiss to my forehead. "No, Mom," he said, his words trembling with emotion. "That's the legacy you left." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The garden outside shimmered with morning light, and a soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the window. I looked at my son, the man he had become, the man I had prayed he'd be, and felt a deep, quiet joy fill my heart. All the years of struggle, of loneliness, of waiting, they had led to this moment. A life complete. A love that had come full circle. And as he sat beside me, reading one more letter in the golden morning light, I thought, if this is the end of my story, then it's a beautiful one.
One quiet afternoon, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. Michael had come over to help me organize some old photo boxes stacked in the corner of my room, the kind of boxes that carried more than pictures. They carried lifetimes. We sat side by side, surrounded by memories, faded photographs, yellowed envelopes, and little mementos that once meant everything. He'd pick one up and smile, asking, "Was this my 5th birthday?" And I'd laugh softly, "Yes, the one where you insisted on wearing a superhero cape to blow out your candles." Then, as he reached for another stack, something caught his eye in the nightstand drawer. It was a folded letter, worn around the edges, its paper soft from years of being handled. He pulled it out gently. "Mom, what's this?" I looked up, and my heart skipped. That letter. I had written it years ago, after the night he turned me away, when the ache in my chest had been too heavy to speak out loud. He unfolded it carefully, his fingers trembling just a little. The ink had faded, but not enough to hide the words I had written through tears and hope. It said, "If you ever find this, my dear son, know that I never stopped loving you. Even when you forgot me, I prayed for you. Because a mother's love doesn't depend on how often her child calls. It just exists, quietly, endlessly waiting for the day they come home." For a long moment, there was only silence. Michael didn't speak. He just sat there, the letter open in his hands, his head bowed. The light caught the shimmer of tears in his eyes, not the kind that fall fast, but the kind that come from deep inside, from places words can't reach. Then he folded the letter again, almost reverently, and said quietly, "This belongs somewhere everyone can see." The next week he had it framed, placed behind glass with a simple wooden border, and hung it on the wall of his office, right behind his desk. Every visitor who came in, journalists, business partners, even friends, saw those words first thing. People would stop and read. Some smiled softly, others just stood there, still and quiet, their expressions changed by something invisible but powerful. And beneath the frame, he added a small brass plaque that read, "For the woman who taught me that love is the only wealth worth keeping." The first time I visited his office after that, I stood in front of it for a long time. I watched as people came and went, young professionals, clients, even strangers, pausing in front of that frame, their faces softened by what they read. Some of them didn't know the story behind it. They didn't need to, because those words, written in faded ink by a mother who once cried herself to sleep, had a life of their own now. They carried warmth, forgiveness, and the quiet truth that love, when it's real, never disappears. I didn't say anything to Michael. I just smiled, a small, knowing smile that only a mother can have, the kind that holds pride, peace, and a touch of gratitude. He finally understood. All those years I had prayed, hoped, and waited, this was the moment it all came full circle. Because love, true love, doesn't end with mistakes. It doesn't fade with time. It only grows stronger when forgiveness finally finds it again.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about love, forgiveness, and finding your way home.